All right, hi, and welcome to our second session of Faith Development Theory. Again, this is the second session of three. We're going to be looking at stages three, the transition out of three, and stage four today. And I'm going to share my screen in just a second, and we'll go through the presentation. I just want to remind you before we get started that you can post your questions in the chat. We'll have a time for Q&A at the end and get to work through some of your questions there. But please mute yourself and be sure to post questions along the way in the chat. That way you don't necessarily forget them. If you have not received the recording from last time, please let me know, email me. We'll make sure that you have access to that. As a reminder, before we get started, though, last time we went through the definition of what faith is. What is it that we're measuring in Fowler's faith development theory? What are stages 0, 1, and 2? We went through those. Those are the stages that we get through just by the growth, our biological growth as human beings. While 7% of the population still measures or identifies as being in stage 2. So you'll want to go back and watch that video if that information isn't familiar to you and you're just not sure what I'm talking about there. I also just want to remind you that the reason why recording these videos and sharing this with you is because I have found that this lens, this paradigm, these ways of articulating our development as human beings, and then specifically our development as people of faith, have been extremely helpful as a disciple maker. I don't know how to be an effective disciple maker without this, because it has made me so much more effective knowing where people are, seeing where they are, understanding how they're making meaning of themselves, of God, of the relationships in their life. And that really helps me meet them where they're at. And then I can be at pace and in step with what God is doing, what God is showing them, rather than just coming at them with my own agenda, which is actually a function of one of our stages that we'll look at today. So we'll get started here. Hopefully my presentation will be okay. So we're gonna look at stage 3. Okay, so stage 3 is the last stage that we will get to just by the natural biological growth of us as human beings. It starts with the onset of puberty. The onset of puberty usually corresponds to this final change, natural biological growth, final change in the brain and the development of the brain. So the age range here, 12, 13 plus, again, just depends on the person and when they hit that. And if you recall from stage 2, this understanding of faith was God is magic and I am what I do. And there's this very one-dimensional perspective taking that they are able to do. So a kid, while they're playing, the character can be both good and bad. And so that they're able to see and take perspective in a very limited one-dimensional way. But that leads them to justice and reciprocity and that sort of thing. So when we hit stage 3, that perspective taking actually changes in complexity. It becomes more complex. And now things just don't take perspective, but they actually have personalities. And we begin to see and understand that people have multifaceted personalities. And so then we also see that God has multifaceted personality, and God is personable, that he can actually be known by us. God can be known to us and by us, and we can have relationship with God. Relationship will be one of the main, and how we have relationship is one of the major hallmarks of this stage. So God is personable, and people can come to faith in this stage at this age, and usually it's that personal relationship with God that compels them. So then how do they make meaning of their own identity? So the statement here is, I am who my people are and who my tribe is. And so their identity is formed through this perspective taking now applied to a group of people. So let's look a little bit at what that means and what that looks like. Okay, so we understand at this stage of development, we understand that people are seeing us and that they have a perspective in how they see us. So the way that this is phrased by Fowler is, I see you seeing me. So the brain is able to say, okay, I see you and I know you see me back. But it creates this existential question that is, but am I the me that you see? And so there's this tension between the me that I feel that I am and the me that you see. And the person is weighing those two against each other because they don't know themselves. And so the only way that they do know themselves is through someone else's eyes. And this is what what we call in psychology a congruence of identity. So what does that mean? That means that is the me that I feel that I am the same me that you see me as? And teenagers, as this is forming, they work this out in some interesting ways. Teenagers will go and spend time with different groups of people, and they are kind of a different person with each one of those groups. And they do that because they're trying on the group. They're trying on the identity like you would try on a jacket, and they're trying to see which one fits. Which group and the way that they see that person feels the most congruent, resonates the best, feels like the best fit with who they feel they are. So if that group, it fits well, then they may then identify with that group. If that group that they hang out with doesn't fit well, they're going to be like, oh, maybe that's not me. And they're trying on these labels, they're trying on these cliques, they're trying on these groups to see which one helps them know themselves the best. That's normal, natural. It's not that your teenager is weird. It's not that your teenager is duplicit. It's not that your teenager is anything is bad happening with your teenager. Like the trying on and being different people being a different person with different people is a normal part of their development. It's okay. It's okay. Help them understand who they are. All right. So that's the I see you seeing me. Again, their identity is part of the group. It's a group identity. And that means that the authority of their identity is actually in the group. I am who my people are. And so you have a group think here. The group makes the decisions. The group holds the identity. The group is the definer and the narrator of who the people are. And so you have a tacit knowing, and tacit means they're unable to express it. And so when you ask them questions like, well, why do you think this? Or why do you believe that? They will say either, I don't know, and be fine with that. Or they'll say things like, well, that's what we've always done. That's what we believe. And so it's an unreflected, unexamined way of knowing, way of believing things. So it's not analytical. And the other main characteristic here is that their social constructs are based on relationship. So what that means is that I only know my world based on the very direct relationships I have in my world. Because the group is the people that are known and the us, and everyone outside that group is the other. So the church family, the nuclear family, or the family is us, and everything outside of that is other. Everyone outside of that is too abstract and too disconnected, too distant for them to actually understand them. And so those very direct relationships are how they construct their social understanding. That means that they can't see systems because they're in it, right? They're in the relationship, and they only know themselves by that relationship. They don't know themselves apart from that relationship. They also don't know the other person apart from that relationship. So they can't see the systems. So when we talk about, as we are right now in our nation having these conversations about systemic racism, a person who's in stage 3 will not be able to see the system part of that. They'll only know whether or not they themselves feel like a racist. And so being part of, if they're white and being part of that part of society, and someone says, well, you're racist, but they don't feel like they're racist, that's an incongruent identity, and they can't understand or see anything beyond those direct relationships. It's just too abstract. I don't mean that judgmentally. I'm not trying to put anybody down. You just can't see what you can't grasp. Okay, so then dealing with them and addressing them in that direct relationship is where you have to start. It's just is. When it comes to our faith development, then the stage 3 makes meaning of their world through the symbol, and the symbol and the ritual are sacred. So for example, maybe you have heard of, or maybe you've been the pastor who's tried to change something about the service, right? You've tried to move when you do communion. You've tried to move the banners and the pictures around, and people have lost their minds. And it becomes surprisingly a really big deal. And that is because they see that symbol or that ritual in and of itself as sacred. And so for you to mess with the ritual is for you to mess with that which is sacred. And this is because at this stage, they understand the meaning behind the ritual by going through the ritual. They need the ritual to mediate the meaning. They cannot understand the meaning apart from the symbol or the ritual, because again, that's too abstract. They need the concrete action of the ritual in order to understand. So they need the concrete act of communion in order to identify with Jesus on the cross, or to experience in some way the incarnation, right? Because incarnation is too abstract, and they need something with handles on it. Okay, so for teenagers, they need the rituals. They need those symbols to walk through and learn from. For adults that are in this stage, the same is true. But when it comes to adults in this stage, for the most part, we really like them as our congregants because of the groupthink, because they're conformist, because they make really great volunteers, and they are loyal, and they show up and they do the thing because the relationship is sacred. So when a person in this stage experiences disruption either in that symbol ritual or in the relationship, it's actually quite disruptive to their identity, because their identity is found in the group and in what the group does. So when you're discipling someone who's in this stage, it's important to use language to help scaffold them and help them to talk about who we are and what we do, and use that to help them understand that. And then the stability of the relationship is really important for them, because the change is extremely disruptive. And it's important to think about what this does, especially for teens. So 50% of churches in North America don't have any children or youth ministry. For the ones that do, for the 50% that do, like 1% have a full-time paid person, 3% have any kind of pay, part-time or full-time, which leaves like 47-ish% that just have volunteers, and that has high turnover. So when there is high turnover in the people who are supposed to be mediating and teaching and facilitating the faith development of these teenagers, when there's high turnover there, it's going to be really unstable for them as a way to build identity as a child of God and as a Christian. So the stability of relationships are key in getting teenagers through this stage of faith. if you, as a pastor, as a leader, you may not be able to provide that in the youth leader position. And if that's true, you need to make sure you have a lot of stability elsewhere within the congregation, and that the teens are connected to that and supported and seen and known by that, because they don't know themselves except for through your eyes. So you have to be explaining what you see in them. You need to see them. You need to know them. You need to articulate that, because they don't know themselves. And whatever you do articulate, they're going to hang on to. And whatever you don't articulate, they'll never know, at least not here. So it's a very sacred task that you have in helping teenagers in this stage. When it comes to helping adults in this stage, it's important to know that this stage holds the most adults. And we'll look at the statistics in a second. But you need to assume that a great number of the adults in your church or that you're working with, or adults that you'd be discipling, are also here. And that is because the transition out of this stage is 2 parts. So let's look at that, and then we'll come back and continue to unpack it. So part 1 is that they need to leave home emotionally. They need to disconnect emotionally from the tribe, from the people, from the group, in order to think about how they feel. Because we're talking about the key thing here is that authority and that identity definition moving from the group to being internalized. And so, like I said, first part is they need to leave home emotionally. The second part is that they need to leave home physically. Okay, because leaving home emotionally allows me to question the values of my people. And questioning is not the same as rebelling. All right, so questioning means I examine it, I think about it, and I say, what do I believe about this? You receive what you believe, you tweak or, have a difference of opinion for what you don't. So leaving home emotionally allows us to examine the values of our people group. Leaving home physically allows us to examine the values of our culture and the way that our culture has done things, right? Because that symbol and that ritual teaches us meaning. But when we leave home physically, then we can see that same value expressed through other cultures in a different way. So how do other cultures worship? How do other cultures pray? How do other cultures, work on and exercise those rituals and symbols? And that 2-part leaving is actually very difficult for most people to do. So what happens if they don't? Right? What happens if they do one of these but not the other? Then there's no leave and cleave. They never actually create their own personal identity. There's no questioning. There's no reflection upon those values. And so there's no internal authority. They don't own it. It's still part of the group. Their identity is still part of the group. They're not their own person. I have a question coming in about what if, you're part of the same church that your parents were and you were raised in, and, and you find yourself an adult, do you still have to leave home? That's a great question. So the answer is still yes, but it may not mean that you have to move. It does mean you need to travel. It does mean you need to get out. It does mean that you need to create enough separation to experience something new, to see a different way of doing it, and to engage in that analytically. It's really great. One really great way to do this is missions trips. So if we take teenagers and we go on a missions trip, they get to experience a new culture, a new way of doing something. They get to see and ask hard questions. And that allows and helps them make their faith their own. And then for those of you who've taken kids on mission trips, you also take adults too, right? And the adults can have aha moments as well. The adults can be changed. And the parts of adults that have, not known that there was a different way of doing something, can have that aha moment and facilitate it in their development here. So mission trips are a great way to practice this transition and to seed for it. Because remember, we seed for the future and we just trust God with what grows and what helps people move forward. Unfortunately, like 16.4% fail to make this transition. 16.4% fail to make this transition. And 24% don't even make it to the transition stage. This is of adults, right? This is of the adult population. So let's think about, some of the things that we're even dealing with practically right here with stage 3. So if you're a leader and you're leading people in stage 3, think about the mandate that California had against singing. Okay, so if the symbol is sacred, and Protestants, our order of service is our ritual, that is our symbols. The liturgical churches look at us and they're like, they don't have any rituals or symbols. But if you're raised in it, then the method that you were raised in the method with which you worship God, when you have communion, the order of service, how the songs go, that is your ritual. So those who the symbol is sacred just got told they couldn't practice the ritual, that then is heretical to them, right? You've just blasphemed that which is sacred, and they have a very hard time. For when you encounter a leader, so let's say another pastor or a leader who's in this stage, and they live in the stage 3. Some of the interesting things that we see with them is that groupthink is what they encourage and what they maintain. So as someone starts to transition out of this stage, it can be very disruptive because they don't know how to have relationships with people who are not in their group. So it can be very hard, it can be very challenging, it can be damaging, because in stage 3, they make meaning based on the group, and for you not to have the same group think means you're not part of the group. It means you're not part of the family. And in order to transition, you actually have to leave the family. And that's unfortunate, and I don't think that it has to be that way. And we'll get to some strategies towards the end of this on what to do. But I've seen pastors who take it very personally, like they personally have been rejected when someone starts to transition into owning their own beliefs and leaving the group think, and therefore they've left that pastor. Like I said, it doesn't have to be that way, but I do see it on a regular basis. So when we have leaders in stage 3, one of the other important things to think about is that a leader cannot disciple people who are in stages beyond them. So a stage 3 leader can only disciple people up to stage 3. Same thing with 4, although I'll put an asterisk there. I think it's possible a stage 4 could create an environment and facilitate discipleship beyond them. But stage 3 definitely can't. So having the groupthink and then making the transition to create your own identity, define yourself, be critical and analytical, again, super disruptive to everyone else who's here. And as churches, unfortunately, we really like people who are here, and we don't always have the best mechanisms to support them through the transition. Again, we'll come back to some tools there. But the thing to note here that's sobering is that, as we identified last time, 7% of adults still make meaning in stage 2, 24% in stage 3, and 16.4% in stage 4, which equals 47.4% who haven't made it to the next stage that we're going to talk about. And that is not meaning people who are pocketed, you know, because I believe that we're Swiss cheese, right? We talked about that last time, where there are pockets of my way of thinking about God that are stuck back in stage 1 and stage 2, and I have therapy that I do, you know, to help with that and grow that up through. But this is talking about people who haven't even made it beyond here even a little bit, to where you can identify it and measure it. So you can be partially in the transition, you can be partially moving out of it. That's not who we're talking about here. We're talking about people who have never left groupthink. So we'll just take a moment and receive that for what that means. I do want to say that I believe that it's God's prerogative on how we move through these stages. And so as a disciple maker, I'm only interested in what God is showing, how God is growing, and where he is challenging people and coming alongside that. So if someone is solidly in stage 3 and there's no hint of transition, I am out of alignment with God's agenda if I'm trying to get them into transition. Now I'll seed and see what sticks, because I don't know what God's agenda is all the time. And it's different for every person, right? So I'm asking God's agenda and paying attention to each person, which is why I believe one person can really only disciple about 5 people well, because of how much awareness this takes. You can work it and, you know, be in a consistent group and maybe see and know where people are to about 12 or 15. But really, if you're going to be listening and asking God, what's his agenda for each person, there is a max on how many people you can do that with. And then you have to go to other strategies, which again, we'll get to in towards the end. But stage 3, stage 4, where are we going? What's the next stage? Again, God's agenda to get us here, because you're not going to get here biologically. Stage 3 is the last stage we will get to as humans through biological growth. Everything thereafter has to be chosen. You have to choose to leave home emotionally. You have to choose to leave home physically. You have to choose to make up your own mind and define what you believe and separate out your identity. All right, so stage 4. Stage 4 is the stage that happens about 20 plus, and that just has to do with the leaving home part. You know, you may leave home emotionally as a teenager, but you don't actually get to leave home physically until you move out or you go to college or that sorts of things. And college is actually meant to facilitate that transition from 3 to 4. That is its primary goal, is to help you think for yourself. But stage 4, being that it involves that 2-part leaving, happens about 20-ish. And this is the stage in which people can come to the Lord by choosing God. And so beforehand, it's like Jesus found me, and Jesus is personable, and Jesus is, you know, can have relationship with me. In stage 4, a person finds God. And people who come to faith in this stage may convert from a different type of religion. They may convert from one denominational type to another, because of the way the symbol and the ritual situation changes, and they become analytical and they start making choices of their own. And so you can hear it in the way they talk. You can hear it in the worship songs that someone in the stage writes. And God is their own. God belongs to them. And there's a lot of this my language in stage 4. So then who are they? How do they craft their own identity? In stage 4, I am what I believe and what I choose. So a person moving into stage 4 will identify their own values, and that authority that was in the group now is internalized. It moves into the inside, and they become the definer of their identity. So you can see how the progression happens. Now in stage 3 transition, you can lose your faith, because in leaving the group, you may leave God because you don't know how to have relationship with God beyond the group. All right, so in that transition, you want to make sure that you are supporting them relationally while leaving it open for them to start to define what they believe. And let them know that they can disagree with you without losing relationship. Like, that is a really big deal for someone coming into the transition. They're trying to identify what they believe themselves, and you need to not require them to break relationship. In fact, you need to pursue the heck out of them as they make their transition into this stage, so that they know the relationship is stable even while their identity is changing. Right, so what are some characteristics of stage 4? Stage 4 is that critical reflection, both on the values of the group and the values of my culture and the values of my society. That critical reflection creates that internal authority. And they examine values in order to determine worldview. So beforehand, relationship was the definer of all their social constructs, right? And that was personal, individual relationship. Now in stage 4, I can have relationship with someone who has the same values that I do, even if they live in a different part of the nation, even if they are in a different denominational stream or theology stream, even if I've never met them. I can have relationship with them because we have what defines us together is what we believe, and it's that shared value and worldview. Now, the interesting thing about this stage is that it's narcissistic in nature, because the definition of truth and reality is that person. The person is defining what they think grace is. They are defining what love is. They are defining what truth is, and they are creating their own world and their own reality based on those values and what they believe. So the other is anybody who does not agree with them, does not believe what they believe. That is who is other. So that narcissism that's inherent there is that they are the originator and the definer of all things. So they define their own identity and relationship to those others. And it's either or, and it's formulaic. It can be very black and white in that either or thing. And it's formulaic in that, I believe, A plus B times C equals D. And here's why I believe that, and here's the research I've done, and here's all the critical reflection I've done to come up with this answer, and this is the answer. And this is the answer. I'm sure you can think of a lot of places that applies to. So let's look at the faith component specifically here. And that is that the symbol and the meaning, which beforehand the symbol was sacred. When we hit stage 4, the symbol and the meaning are decoupled. They are taken apart. And so then the symbol is handled one way, the symbol and the ritual, and the meaning is handled a different way. And it's the meaning that is separated out in order to be examined. So they're separated because the person wants to go deeper into the meaning and know that more. So this is when worship isn't just singing. Worship is actually living in awe of God and giving everything back to him. So then, therefore, what counts as worship? A lot more, right? And so a person in this stage, will say things like, well, I can spend time with God, but I don't have to read my Bible, right? Because you don't need the ritual in order to have the time with God. A person in this stage may not come to church in order to experience God, right? Because they're experiencing God apart from the ritual of a Sunday service gathering. So if you're in stage 3 and you no longer have the ritual, you can no longer experience the meaning. If you're in stage 4, you don't miss the ritual, you don't miss the symbol because you're really interested in the depth of the meaning. The problem with that is when someone in the stage is the leader and they impose that on everyone else, and they de-ritualize and de-symbolize their situation. So let's go back to that church example of moving the banners out of the sanctuary. If the leader is in stage 4, they're like, what's the problem? You know, we can still remember it, it's just in a different room, or wow, that's really ugly, and so I can't hang on to that symbol because we need something better for that is better reminding us of the meaning. So they're imposing that way of understanding the world on everyone else. So to a stage 3 person, that's very disruptive and can be traumatic. And so that's why the stage 4 is narcissistic, because they're defining the truth. And the truth is, you don't need that banner to know that God is your provider. And they're defining how everyone should be experiencing their faith. And if they do that in ignorance of the needs of stage 3ers, it can be very destructive. Now, we like people who are in stage 4. We like them as leaders because they're confident, because they can give a really good sermon that explains and tells everybody what to do and has great application points. And they're just very sure, and that's reassuring to everyone else. And so if you're a stage 3er and you're in groupthink, you're like, yeah, that's exactly right. Give me more of that. Tell me what to do. I want to be told what to do. And then stage 4ers, who would also be part of the same congregation, are there because they agree with what the pastor is saying and they agree with their values, and they're like, yes, that was really good. And so churches naturally form this dynamic of stage 3 congregation and stage 4 leadership. And they support and are very happy with one another. The transitions are always the problem. Unanswered prayers, what God does when things stop working the way we designed them to work, is what creates the problem. But leaders in stage 4, again, if you know how to minister to people in stage 3, it can be, people really like it. It's when you start to violate and impose your agenda on them, and that it's different than what they believe. That's when it gets disruptive. So how do you disciple someone in stage 4? Disciples and people in stage 4 like to process, and they can see some systems. They like to analyze the system, and they define their own belief. But that formulaic narcissistic center as the definer of truth really does create limitations. And some of those limitations would be what happens when the formula doesn't work. A person in stage 4 would say, here's the way that we pray, and that's how you get saved. Here's the sinner's prayer, and that A plus B equals salvation, and now you have to be baptized, and that equals whatever, because they've defined it. But when someone has a different experience, when someone doesn't align with that formula, and maybe even when God doesn't align with that formula, it becomes problematic. A person in stage 4 is also going to impose that formula on other people. So one place you can see this a lot is healing. So there's a certain way, a stage 4, there's a certain way that we pray, and here's how we pray, and here's what we do. And if you don't get the healing, that's on you. Because it's that narcissistic center that the individual is a definer of reality. And if it didn't work, their reality isn't shaken, but they're going to put it on you that you didn't participate with the formula correctly. You didn't participate into that definition of reality, because they can't see what's beyond that. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know that anything exists outside of that. So what's interesting about discipling teenagers in stage 3 is they at least know there's more to know. They at least know there's a whole world out there. When you get adults in stage 3 and stage 4, they don't know there's a whole world out there. 3, they really don't know there's a whole world out there. And 4, they don't know there's a world beyond their understanding. They don't know there's a world beyond their definition. And when that starts to fracture, or people start to experience things that take them out of that, they'll really double down on that formula. They'll really double down on what they believe. And so that means that they really can't disciple those who are above stage 4. Now, again, I think that it would be possible that they could be aware enough to have other people around to help, that they could be understanding enough that even while they haven't entered into the questioning that is the transition out of 4, that they know it exists and provide for it. So the leading edge from the transition out of 3 is landing your own beliefs, declaring, this is what I believe and this is what I think. And that helps that transition from 3 into 4. The transition out of 4, the leading edge is questions and doubt and uncertainty. And as we'll look at next week, we'll look at that transition. We'll look at stage 5 and stage 6. And the question has come up, like, how do we craft community in a way that supports all of this so that we as the leader are not the limiting factor? And what I would say is that you need all the people there. You need people who are in stage 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And 5 are going to be your elders, the eldering group. And so you need this whole community that is there as a faith community, because then as people grow, they'll naturally have affinity with different people who can help teach them or help them understand where they are. And yet they can also then see that someone else is in a different place, understands God a different way, and that relationship can naturally grow as God leads them and they, transition into that, or, they just know that it exists and it's fine. Because I do believe that it's God's prerogative on where we are, and it's just about whether or not we're being obedient to Him and His timing, right? The goal is not to get everybody to 4, and the goal is not to get everybody to 5. I would say that no one should have stage 2 unless they have either dementia or some sort of mental deficiency, because stage 2, you get to stage 3 just biologically. Dementia, on that other end will cause people to regress back down to stage 2. And we have grace for them and we love them well and we understand that God is magic to them. Okay. But beyond that, everyone should be at least a stage 3 in most of their personhood and most of the areas of their life, in the concepts and the pockets and the things that they believe. So if we have a community with everyone in it, then it'll naturally ebb and flow and support and disciple one another as God grows people. The hard part is when we get so narrow in how we create a faith community that everybody has to be in the same stage and everybody has to agree. So it's either that group identity or everyone has the exact same value. The hard part is when we create them like that, then in order for people to grow and follow God and His development and leading of them, then they have to leave our community. And I don't think it has to be that way. I don't think God intends for it to be that way. I don't think God intends us to break relationship while people change their mind about stuff, while people grow and think a different way. They shouldn't have to break relationship with one another in order to change and develop. The relationship should be strong enough for them to do that. So stage 3 teenagers should be able to go and experience something else, make up their own mind about things, know what they believe, know what they think, and still have relationship with their parents, and maybe even still come back to that hometown, but now be a formed stage 4, right? So if we create communities that have all of this, we can support people through all of this. The problem is when we're narrow. It's also problematic when you have a stage 3 leader, because then there's a whole lot of the population that they can't disciple, and they can be rather punitive and destructive to people who leave relationally. And again, you just want to be a leader who supports whatever God's agenda is, right? So that agenda that you have of trying to get everybody to your same understanding as you is a stage 4 characteristic. So just think about where you are. Think about, some of those key moments in your life, maybe when you made your own decision that it was your faith and not your parents, or maybe when you risked the relationship that you had with everyone in order to become your own person. And just, just think about that. Think about your own journey here. 24.8% of the population is here. So between the two, we're looking at about 75% of the adult population. We'll look at the transition next week and how you can lose your faith here and how people can get stalled out here. But only 25% of the population even begins to leave this stage. And that's because we can always, we start to experience the transition and we move back into the stage and we double down on the group identity, or we double down on the formula and we're like, no, I'm going to make it work. Or I'm not going to leave my people, right? So we may be starting to experience some of the transition and then move backwards and hang on. And the good news is that God is faithful for the agenda He has for our life. And you can avoid the transition out of stage 4 for maybe 10 to 15 years. I think you can fight it, but eventually it will catch up with you. So we'll look at that next time. We'll look at the transition. We'll look at 5 and 6, examine those. So I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to go into some of the questions that we have here. I do want to point out one thing before I go, is just that agenda of individualism that stage 4 naturally does versus the community development. At some point, we need to get both individuals and community healthy. And that'll be moving towards stage 5. The individualist way of making meaning is a 4. And like I said, you can grab that with closed fists and say, the way that I define it, my right, it's about me, right? Because it's inherently narcissistic. It doesn't see and think about the meaning beyond itself and what it's defined. So people get into stage 3 about in their 20s, or stage 4 about their 20s. And usually Fowler described, or he just surveyed a lot of people and investigated a lot of people. And he said he didn't see anyone below the age of 35 into stage 5. So moving into your 20s into stage 4, staying there for a good chunk of time. And it's later in life, and we'll look at that transition next time, but later in life that you start to accumulate the negative experiences that facilitate the transition to 5. But again, all of these have to be chosen from 3 on out. All of them have to be participated with. All of them have to be discipled. So whether the Holy Spirit is doing it, whether the Holy Spirit and a community is doing it, like all of that has to happen and the person has to participate. Just because they get older doesn't mean they're actually changing stages. It doesn't mean that the way they make meaning is moving. And that's where this developmental theory, faith developmental theory, is different than other faith theories out there, is because of that. So other theories have, you just, this time of life and this time of life and this time of life, and you will eventually become a sage because you get old. Faith development theory does not hang on to that. People will die in stage 3, and I would not call them a sage or an elder because they don't make meaning of their world in that kind of a way. So that's where this is different, because it's based in psychology, development, biology, and how people actually think about things, not just, how much energy they have and whether or not they have kids and that sort of thing. So the timeline is varied and not assumed to move. So you as a disciple maker, you as a leader, again, hearing where people are, asking God what his agenda is for them and partnering with that and saying, wow, you're in the transition. I'm going to pursue you so we don't have to break relationship in this. And I will support and encourage, whether it's that defining of your own belief or it's that questioning and that doubt. I'm going to support you in either of those. And then when it comes to the flat spots of stage 3 and stage 4, I'm going to make sure that we're having rituals. I'm making sure that can scaffold your development and understanding of the meaning. And then if you're a stage 4 and you don't get any meaning out of the ritual, I'm going to remind you that it's not about you and that we're part of a community. And so we need to do these rituals to help other people grow. And if it's not satisfying and you need to also in your own personal life, which you should be doing, experiencing God, worshiping God, learning the word on your own, yes. But you're also part of a community. So we're going to do both so that it supports everybody. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now and we'll get to some questions.